beautiful. The room is set up, and we're just going to get right into worship.
The room is set up.
It is. Amen. And we're just going to give all thanks and praise to our God today. Here we go. Toned down from that last song we did, but the words and the lyrics still remain true, that the grace that God gives us is more than we can ever imagine and ask to receive, and He is worthy of all worship because of that.
What have you done? Luke chapter 22, verse 14, Jesus sits down with his disciples for this first Lord's Supper, and he says to them, I've desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer, for I tell you I'll not eat it again until it's fulfilled in the kingdom of God. And he takes a cup, and when he had given thanks, he said, take this and divide it among yourselves. For I tell you that from now on I will not drink the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God comes. And then he took bread, when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to them. And he said, this is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. And so each month, the first Sunday of each month, we celebrate communion, the Lord's Supper, as a way to stop and remind ourselves about Jesus. Because it's real easy for another month to go by and forget, like, why am I alive? Why am I doing the things that I am doing? Why am I here? Why does any of this matter? It's easy to just start doing things and forget it's about Jesus and becoming like him. We're here for his kingdom and for his glory. And so we do this each month to remind ourselves, to stop and remind ourselves of Jesus. And so go ahead and you can open up your package and you can take out the wafer, which represents his body. Jesus, thank you for laying down your life for us. And then you can open up the package and drink the juice. Jesus, thank you for shedding your blood. Thank you for the new promise that we can be your students. We can live and love like you. We can be kingdom people living in your coming kingdom. Just take a minute and thank Jesus right where you are. And I'm going to invite Al to come up and speak first.
Good morning. How's everyone doing today? Great. Good, yeah. Weather's getting colder, season's starting to change, and you got the people that you know usually immediately if they're either winter people or summer people. And I won't judge you anyway, but we know that winter people are better people. Just kidding. But and I just want to say, I truly do love this church. I really love coming to this place and worshiping. Being a pastor for a number of years, there was good years, there was bad years, and there was times when leaving church, I would leave with more anxiety than peace. And I'm very grateful to find a church here at Horizon under Pastor Alex and Darby, where I don't leave this place with anxiety. I leave this place with peace and hope. And I appreciate their friendship. I appreciate the way they treat my kids. Really means a lot. And happy birthday, Alex. We love you, man. We're glad that you're here. We're glad that the church is here. And happy birthday to my wife, Marissa. And it's pretty cool that my two favorite people share the same birthday. So
makes it easy to remember.
it does make it easy to remember. Yes, it does. But happy birthday, guys. We love you guys so much. And it's cool to get to do this together. So, we have been doing this series called Becoming People of Love, and Alex gave me the wonderful and difficult task to preach about parenthood and becoming parents of love. And I just want to say, this has probably been one of the hardest messages to write, because I think family can be really triggering sometimes. And I think it can be really complicated sometimes. And I think we sometimes get our perception of God a little fuzzy based on our experience with our family. And it could be really challenging, or it could be really encouraging. And so I wanted to approach this from a place where I do not have all the answers. This is not 7 steps to becoming a better parent or becoming a better child. This is just some observations that I have, and really just sharing from one story of the Bible from Jesus, because I think when it comes to being a parent of love, I think a good place to start is what Jesus' perspective on what a good parent was. But before that, the title of this message is called Kinder Than Necessary. And being this holiday season, I think when we think of like being kinder than necessary, getting close to Christmas, it's always like getting that perfect gift, right? Whether it's a birthday or a holiday, getting that perfect gift can sometimes be like the mile marker of like, oh, they really care, they got me this perfect gift. So I'm going to go through the decades of the Christmas gift. And we're starting in the 60s. And in the 60s, the Christmas toy to get was the Easy Bake Oven. I don't know if any of y'all had any of those. All right, I think it was like 200 watt bulbs, and you made cookies that probably tasted like rubber. I don't know, but it was cool. My friend Mary Ann had it. I thought it was the coolest thing. But Easy Bake Oven was pretty awesome. Then in the 70s, one of the most popular Christmas toys was the Pet Rock. No lie, this was like a real legit thing. It sold 1.5 million rocks. The cost of the rock in the 70s was $4. Based on inflation today, it would be around $50. So can you imagine spending $50 on that? But they did, because that was like the gift to get. And then in the 80s, you started to get to my generation. And, the big gift was the Nintendo. And the really interesting thing about Nintendo was when this came out, video games were not a profitable business. They were going bankrupt. Atari was going bankrupt. So the fact that Nintendo released this was a big risk. And it truly, truly paid off and started a whole new generation of video gamers. And then in the 90s, you guys could probably guess what toy I'm going to talk about in the 90s. I think this is triggering enough as it is. Tickle Me Elmo. All right, why? Why was this such a big gift? I don't understand. It's up there with the Pet Rock. All right, it probably cost just as much. And the crazy thing was, this gift was so desired that 2 women got arrested in Chicago in 1996 over this toy. So just to kind of put some things into perspective. And then in the 2000s, this is one of the most popular Christmas gifts, the Razor scooter, which was expensive because, not just for the cost of the scooter, but because of the hospital bills that parents had to pay for kids trying to do backflips and tricks off steps. I mean, this thing was crazily dangerous, but I think that was like the cool factor was that it was dangerous and kind of cool. And I just remember kids always having these around. And then as we get closer to the 2010s, and we go into the tablet generation, where everyone seems to have a tablet, whether it's an iPad or an Amazon Fire. And Keen, my son's giving me the thumbs up because I don't know where he would be without his tablet or Wi-Fi. And so I say all this because these gifts, these were like the it gifts to have. And if you were a parent, you got this gift and you felt like you succeeded in some way or another better. Either you failed the rest of the year, if you got this gift, you were a winner. And just to see that joy in the kids' eyes was enough, even if you just failed so much. Getting that gift was enough. But this is the interesting thing. According to a recent survey, 73% of kids want to bond with their parents, not have the latest toy or gift. 73% of kids want to bond with their parents. It's not something you put a price tag on. It's not something you can find in a store. It's something that close to 3/4 of kids want. Now, let's put this on the flip side. What about parents? What do parents want? 70% of parents want to spend quality time with their kids. Isn't that interesting? I don't know where that 3% of parents are. I don't know. Maybe the 3% of Karens. I don't know. You just never please them. All right? But just think about that for a second. What kids want and what parents want is to be together. Presence is greater than presence. Let me say it again. Kids respond more to your presence than your actual presence that you give them. And sometimes we can get so caught up on material things and the it thing when it comes to families, it's just being together is enough. And I like how Henry Newman kind of puts this in perspective when applying it to God, because I think sometimes when we approach our relationship with God, there is that lens through how we approach God through being a parent. And he says this: God is neither a policeman or a Santa Claus. God does not send us to heaven or hell depending on how often we obey or disobey. And I want to pause right there for a second, because I think sometimes as parents, we can fall into those two traps. It's like you're like the disciplinarian, my job is to get you doing wrong so that you can do right. And then there's the flip side where it's like, I just want to give you everything you want because then you like me and love me. You know, and you kind of go back and forth between like Santa Claus or a policeman. And it's neither of those things in our relationship to our parents or in our relationship to God. God is not out to get you, and God doesn't love you based on the good things in your life. God is love and only love. In God there is no hatred, desire for revenge, or pleasure in seeing us punished. God wants to forgive, heal, restore, show us endless mercy, and see us come home. Presence is what matters. And in fact, the Trinity, God the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, is the representation of family and community. All right, that's why when we, I think that's why it's so hard sometimes when we don't find that community and we don't find those relationships, and when things are broken, it is so difficult because it really goes against our nature. We are designed for community. That's how God made us. He wants us to be together. And in thinking about, how to talk about being people of love, being a parent of love, I'm a 5th grade teacher, 5th and 6th grade teacher, and this year we started off the year in our Bible class talking about the parables of Jesus. And I think one of the most significant parables of Jesus is the one that has many names. It's been called the parable of the lost son. It's been called the parable of the prodigal son. It's called the parable of the forgiving father. And I've spoken about this verse and this parable many, many times because I love it, because there's something about it that every time I read it, I find something new, and because I identify with a brother that ran away, that always had to learn the hard way. So any of you out there who are the ones that have to learn the hard way, and that's how you learn, I love you, all right? You're not like, we're in this together. But I want to really take a look at this parable from the perspective of the father. Because oftentimes I immediately go to the son that ran away. But I really want to really take some time to really focus on the father. We're going to break this parable down verse by verse. All right, this is found in Luke 15, 11 to 31, the parable of the forgiving father. To illustrate the point further, Jesus told him this story. A man had 2 sons. The younger son told his father, I want my share of your estate now before you die. So his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. This is a significant statement that the son said, I want my share of your estate before you die. All right? Basically, the only way in that culture that a son could get the estate, can get what the father has in terms of money and resources, is either 2 things. Either the father had to retire, or the father had to die. And basically what this son was saying, Dad, I wish you were dead. And not only is that just egregious as a son to say that to the father, in that culture, he could have been stoned for saying that because it goes against the law of dishonoring your father and mother. Saying something like that, doing something like that, wanting something like that was a grave sin in that culture. And so this was a significantly horrible thing to do for a son to say to his father. And the father agreed. No fight, no trying to change the son's mind. The father agreed. Divide his wealth between the sons. Goes on to say this. A few days later, this younger son packed all his belongings and moved to a distant land. And there he wasted all his money in wild living. About the time his money ran out, a great famine swept over the land, and he began to starve. He persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into the fields to feed the pigs. The young man became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him, but no one gave him anything. This is also very, very significant because the thing in this verse that is egregious is not the fact that the son spent all his money. Not the fact that the son spent his money on wild living, and as we learn later on in this parable, spoiler, on like prostitutes and things of that nature. In that culture, what was the most egregious thing that would bring this honor to not just this young man, but to the father as well, is being in the trough with the pigs, feeding on the food that the pigs eat. Because in that culture, pigs were unclean. You don't eat from the pig, you don't touch from the pig. And there was almost like these like two dynamics in like what to do and what not to do. Yeah, there was like oral sins, but then there was like sins of like the law, where like there's these certain procedures, these certain rituals, and you couldn't touch certain things. You had to like follow these ritualistic like ways of living that kind of showed whether or not you were like holy or not. You know, not that we have any like legalistic things like that in our culture today, but you know what I mean. These certain traditions that we hold to, and if you break traditions, you know, God forbid. And so, not only was he feeding with the pigs, touching the pigs. I mean, this was like the lowest of the low that a person can go in that day. They would be more upset with this stuff, eating with pigs and touching the pigs, than the wild living and the wild spending. That was more egregious in that time. Just to give you a heads up. So this son just goes to, like, as far as he can go of doing what is wrong. In that culture, this is considered like the worst thing that you can do. And another interesting thing about this parable is that he persuaded the local farmer to hire him. Basically, what he is doing here is becoming a slave and giving up his rights. And one of the ways that you would do that is that you would take off your sandals. And the way you would take off your sandals, that would signify that you were a slave and you wouldn't run away. So one of the ways that this man would persuade the farmer was to give up his sandals. And we're going to come back to the sandals later on in this, but keep that in mind, because he was doing anything he could just to survive and even go down to the dregs of society and be a scoundrel in that day and age. What was considered good or honorable, it was the opposite. Next verse goes on to say this: when he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, "At home, even the hired servants have enough food to spare. And here I am dying of hunger. I will go home to my father and say, Father, I sinned against both heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me on as a hired servant." I want to just take a moment to look at these two verses because they're kind of similar and they're kind of different. When you go back, it says that he was a hired servant and he was starving. But then how did his father treat the people that were working with him? Good. They were fed. You know, I think sometimes becoming people of love is how we treat those who do nothing for us. One of the significant reasons of why this son decided to go back home was not how much the father loved him. That was part of it. But how much his father loved everyone and treated everyone with dignity and kindness and love. The servants of the day, that would probably be like minimum wage workers working in the fields. They weren't like servants how we would think of servants in American culture. They would be like minimum wage workers working in the fields, working the lands. They were paid well and they had enough food to spare. He didn't give them minimum wage. He gave them a living wage. And the son realized this. And it makes me think, you know, becoming a person of love, becoming a parent of love, it goes so much more beyond just how we treat our family. How do we treat those others? How do we treat others? When we're in the checkout line, when we're getting frustrated, how do we treat people at work? How do we treat people when no one is looking? How do we treat people when we post things online? You know, we can go down the list. You know, how do we treat people when no one's looking? The son was looking. And it makes me think of one of the things I really love about my father. And my father did a really, really good job trying to give me all those things that I wanted. There was some Christmases when I couldn't get what I wanted, but my dad did a lot to try and do to get me those things. And those were nice. It was nice to have like video games and all those kind of stuff. But what I really loved most was, and I started to pick this up on later in life, when I was in college. Because like when I was in high school, it was either like I just didn't have maturity to realize what my parents were trying to do. Sometimes I would get so hung up on the things that they do that I think they should do. But I really started to get this mindset of like, wow, like I really need to appreciate my parents more. I was in college when I was going through the admissions process and talking to the registrar. They're like, your dad's so nice. Like, I really enjoyed talking with your dad. And I was like, really? You know, I was like, oh, that's cool. You know, and then like it started me to like think about the little things that my dad would do that I didn't really notice at the time, but when I thought back were kind of big deals. Like when people would miss, like when my neighbors would miss the bus, he would drive them to work. Like little things like my neighbor Rick, who was a huge Pittsburgh Steelers fan, and for some reason I think his TV was out, and the Eagles were playing the Steelers that day. And he invited him over, and we watched the game together. The Eagles won that day, by the way. It's always great when the Eagles beat the Steelers. But I watched a lot of games with my dad. I watched the Eagles lose a lot of games with my dad. But that's one of the games that stick out the most to me, was when Rick came over. And it was just like, it's just one of those things that you can't put a price tag on. You know, so it's little things that are simple but significant. And you might be thinking like, well, I didn't have a dad like that, I have a mom like that. Okay. Can you be a person like that? There's little things that you can do for others that may seem insignificant or of most significance. Malcolm Forbes, from Forbes magazine, said this. Said, you can easily judge the character of a man by how he treats those who can do nothing for him. You know, think about it. You know, I'm an Enneagram 3, and I'm very driven, and I want to go to the top. I want to be the best I can in my career, and so I struggle with this tension of am I doing this because it's the right thing to do, or am I doing this because I want to get ahead of my career, right? I mean, think about it. How we treat others. Are we doing this because I want something from someone, or I'm doing this because it's just the right and loving thing to do? You know, in our jobs, in our relationships, with our kids, are we motivated by what we get, or are we motivated by what we give? And it's really simple, and it's really subtle, but it's something that I struggle with, because I really want to be authentic in how I live, and how I love, and how I work. And I struggle with this, because sometimes we can keep track, right? Well, I did this at work, I did that at work. No one wanted to do that. I did it, right? And then it's you're kind of waiting for you plant good seeds, you get good fruit, right? Not always, right? I mean, if you're always doing something because of what you can get back, is that really a person of love, or is that person who just wants to get ahead? And I want to encourage you, sometimes the payback isn't in this lifetime. Sometimes we won't know or understand the things that we do in this life until the next life. And, just to, recently have one of those weak moments on Facebook. Sometimes where it's just having one of those days you just want to vent and just put something out there. And I'm a verbal processor. I'm a person that processes the community. I know some of you introverts out there, it's you just kind of take it all in. Well, I'm not that kind of person, all right? It's sometimes I let people know my business too much, all right? And so on Facebook, I just had one of those days where I was just struggling. I was like, hey, it's been hard to transition out of ministry into teaching. It's been hard to be in your 40s and starting over a new career when you see people your age making twice what you make. And it's hard. And it makes me realize, could I have done something different? Why couldn't I have done this? Why couldn't I have done that? And you start going back in hindsight, and you start judging those things that you've done, and it's oh, it's all a waste because man, look at my life now, and it's tough and it's hard and da 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 da. It's having one of those pity parties. Come on, you know what I'm talking about? If Facebook isn't your place to pity party, maybe you have that certain someone that you just always vent to or go to when you're upset. That first call. You know what I'm talking about? You know that person, right? Where it's you can just vent and it's nice. And so I put this out there about how ministry is hard and how starting over as a teacher is hard and all this kind of stuff. And, just having one of those moments. And I got a message on Facebook from one of my students who was in youth ministry years ago, over 10 years ago. And he was sharing, he's like, don't ever doubt what you were doing was the right thing. He said, I don't know if you remember this or not, back when we were at a National Youth Convention, that night when you talked to me at the top of the hotel, that night, he's like, I wanted to take my life. And I was like, oh, I never knew that. And he's like, that conversation changed everything. Never knew that. He never said it. And they had no clue. And, sometimes in life, you don't get to see those things. I don't know if that was like one of those like God things where God's like, hey, you're doing better than you think you are. I think that's why it's important to like encourage people, because you never know what that encouraging word can do for them. Him just saying that made really put everything in perspective for me. And now he's married, has kids, and is doing great. And it's just like, just that one word, that one encouraging thought. If I had to choose having a better paying job, or having this young man here on earth, I'll take it any day. And God's the same way. I think God looks at us the same way. He cares about us so much that we even realize. And sometimes we get a glimpse of that love, and sometimes we get the full embrace in the life to come. And we go on, we're going to talk about this next part of this verse. So he returned home from his father. And while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him and kissed him, and his son said to him, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. This small phrase, he ran to his son. Looking at this phrase from our American way of thinking of things thematically and dramatically, it's like Walmart, it's almost like a Hallmark movie. The father and the son run into each other with positive Christian music playing in the background, and it's like, oh, it's awesome. And then the snow starts to fall, even though it's in the Middle East, but it's for dramatic effect, right? And they're running, and it's like they embrace, and it's like, oh, it's like super awesome dramatic moment. Yeah, that has nothing to do with this right here. Him running to his son was scandalous. In that day, running with your tunic, you are exposing yourself. And so this was in that Middle Eastern culture. Fathers didn't run like this. They didn't. That was a sign of disgrace. And so, when we sing songs like Reckless Love and all those kind of things, Scandal of Grace, that's this right here. The father cared so much about his son that he didn't care what people thought of him. He just cared about loving that son. Because here's the thing. Because what this son did was so scandalous, the father didn't want anyone else coming to the son first to say, you can't come back. Do you know what you did? Do you know what you've done? You know the shame you brought in this house? The father wanted to be the first one to greet the son, because if he wasn't, the son would have left. And we know this because, spoiler alert, later on in this verse, we hear that the oldest son had heard everything that had happened to the son, because he volunteered that information. This son of yours squandered his wealth on prostitutes. How did he know that? The father never said that to him, because word spread. And so we serve a God who wants to meet us first. Wants to run to you first. Because he doesn't want all those other voices to be the first one that you hear, to distract you, to dissuade you from coming home. He ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. I love that picture. Because sometimes we can get caught up in how things look, right? What would it look if I forgive what would it look like? I mean, we play these weird games sometimes of culture expectations and what does it look like and all this kind of stuff. And God doesn't care how it looks like when it comes to loving someone. That person is worth way more than perception. You are worth way more than the perception of others. This son was sought as the lowest of the lows, a scoundrel not worth anything. And we serve a God that is willing to love us recklessly in a scandalous way, risking his reputation. It's mind-boggling, the love of God. And this is why I keep coming back to the faith. You know, when things get hard, when things get difficult, and I'm like, man, is it worth it to be a Christian? Like, sometimes things just don't add up all the time. But what brings me back is the love of Christ, the love of God. When things don't make sense, his love is what always draws me back. And I love this next part. But his father said to the servants, quick, bring the finest robe of the house, put it on him, get a ring for his finger, and sandals for his feet. Kill the calf we have been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast. For this son of mine was dead, and now returned to life. He was lost, but now is found. So the party begins. I love that when we mess up and we come home, God throws us a party. God is a God who wants to celebrate, not like just pour on the shame and the guilt. That's not the type of God we serve. We don't serve a God of shame and guilt. We serve a God who, when you come home, wants to throw you a party. And there's a couple of things going on in this verse. The three things, the robe. This is significant because this calls back to Abraham and to Adam and Eve when they sinned. What was the first thing that God did when they sinned? Clothe them. All right, so this is a callback to that. We serve a God who wants to cover your sin, not expose it to everyone. He wants to cover it. I love that picture. When people were coming, when the soldiers were coming to arrest Jesus, and Peter famously cuts off the soldier's ear, he doesn't cut off the soldier's ear because Peter is like a skilled warrior. No, he cut off the ear because he was going for the head and he missed. Okay? And what does Jesus do? He heals the person's ear. Not because he loves the soldier. He does. That's part of it. But he heals the ear to remove the evidence of Peter. Because if he didn't remove the evidence and heal the ear, Peter would become arrested and get killed. And the church would never be able to have the explosion they had in the early church if Peter wasn't part of it. We serve a God that covers our sin. And then sandals on the feet. Before I get sandals on the feet, ring on his finger. I love this because that ring on the finger was a sign of identity. Listen, even though you wanted me dead, even though you wanted nothing to do with me, you're still part of this family. And no matter what you do, no matter what you've done, you'll always be my son. And God looks at you and says, no matter what you've done, no matter what you do, you'll always be my son. You'll always be my daughter. There is nothing that you can do that can separate you from the love of Christ. There is no sin that you have done that is bigger than the cross. And when you make your sin bigger than the cross, that is pride. Because Jesus has died for everything that you have done and will do. I love this next part. Sandals on his feet. This is restoring his value. Because slaves, a sign of a slave was to take off your shoes. Because then you couldn't run away. So the fact that he puts sandals on his feet is saying, you have value. Remember, he wanted to just come back and be a servant? But he's like, no. When you come back to me, you're not going to be how you were. And you're not going to get what you deserve. You're going to get more than that. I love that when we ask for goodness, and we serve a God that doesn't give us what we deserve, he gives us more than we can ever think or imagine. I love that we serve a God who wants to throw a party for us, even when we mess up. I love this quote from Mary Kay. Mary Kay, actually Mary Kay Cosmetics. There are two things people want more than sex and money. Recognition and praise. Alright, let me just pause and think about that for a second. Alright, those are things in our society. I mean, you just look at advertisements. What drives advertisements? Status and sex, right? But what do people really want? Recognition and praise. Come on, think about it. People don't leave jobs because of their job. People leave jobs because of bosses. Bottom line. A lot of times people really do like what they're doing, but it's really hard because they don't like what they're doing it for. And just a little bit of recognition, just a little bit of appreciation could go a whole long way. A little bit of praise. You know? Reward what you want repeated. You know, I think as a parent, I think this is something that I really try to think of the most is, you know, I can get really hard on my kids sometimes, but if I want to see them do better, it's like, man, I gotta celebrate more wins than losses. We gotta celebrate more as parents and as Christians. We don't do enough job of celebrating enough. You know, I think we need to throw more parties as people of love, right? Seriously. Sometimes, I think that's one of the reasons why churches are so dead. They don't celebrate. Because the standard is so high. And no one can really live to that standard. And if they are within that standard, they're probably faking it. Alright? This week, we had a big project for a book that we've been reading called Wonder in my class. And one of the girls in my class did two parts of it and didn't do the third part. And she didn't have the part with her. And she was like, oh, my friend emailed it to me and it got deleted. And I was like, are you sure? And there's another girl. She was like, oh, let's go check your phone. Let's go see if we can find the deleted files. There was no deleted files. Right? And I could tell, like, she was kind of giving that, like, she was, like, really trying to, like, stick to the script, right? And she's like, really? Like, I can't find these things anywhere. And she's like, it was there. And, we go back and forth. And so, like, later on in the day, I, like, pulled her aside. I was like, was there really any files? And she was, like, sticking to the script. She's like, yeah, it's like, technology, you just never know what can happen sometimes. I'm like, yeah, technology is really funny. And I was like, I'll believe you. But is this what's happened? Because if it is, I'll believe you. But if it's not, that's okay. You can tell me the truth. And she was like looking all around. I was like, I'd rather you tell me the truth than say something happened with it. I'd rather you tell me. You're not going to get in trouble if you tell me the truth. I'm like, if that's true, that's fine. But if it's not the truth, I'd rather you tell me now because you won't get in trouble. And she's like, I didn't do it. There was no file. And I was like, you did something very brave. I said, I appreciate what you said. I said, I'm not going to mark you late. I said, you can hand it in tomorrow. I said, and you're going to get a dojo point. So if you don't know what dojo points are, they're like little achievements that my students get. And if they get a certain amount of dojo points, they get a prize, right? And so then, like, the more dojo points they get, the bigger the prize is, right? It's like, it's not bribery. I think it is achievements, right? Positive reinforcement. And so I gave her a dojo point for not handing in her homework because she told the truth. And I wanted her to know that this is a safe place where you can tell the truth. And she handed it in the next day, and it was awesome. Awesome. And in Wonder, she put like a little heart in the word Wonder. And I was like, oh, shout out to the girls. Always put like little hearts in the O's and I's, all right? I was just like, oh man. I was like, to me, it was like, she got an A. She told the truth. Because guys, how hard is it for us to tell the truth sometimes? We fake it till we make it. And I don't know where that phrase comes, but you don't fake it till you make it. You just continue to fake it until you break it. Alright? Or burn out, or whatever. Be honest. Be vulnerable. I think that's one of the most powerful things you can be in a family, is honest and vulnerable. It's hard, it's tough, and we mask it with things and stuff, but it doesn't last and it doesn't work. Be vulnerable, be honest. It may be really hard, but it's worth it. One of my friends, Mike Braddock, he's like a motivational speaker. And he told me this line back in the day, and I love it. I might have shared it here before, but he said this, and I think it's really powerful when it comes to like families and just becoming people of love. He said this: it's better to be awkward for a moment than uncomfortable forever. Let me say that again. It's better to be awkward for a moment than uncomfortable forever. That awkward truth, that awkward moment, that awkward uncomfortable, like that awkward moment that's hard, is way worth it than that weird uncomfortableness that you feel forever. And you know it, right? Because when you don't address something that you should address, or you don't say something that you should say, when you get around that person, don't you feel a little weird? There's always that like odd tension, and it's like you try to mask it, but it's still there. It's better to be awkward for a moment than uncomfortable forever. If you need to have an awkward moment with God, or with someone that you love or someone that you know, do it. That's being a person of faith. We think like being a person of faith is like believing God for the big stuff. Sometimes it's just being honest and awkward in the small stuff. Because that awkward honesty in the small stuff, when it's not addressed, becomes big stuff. Meanwhile, I love it. I love how like Jesus tells a story. Meanwhile, Next verse. Dun, dun, dun. Our favorite person in this character. The older son was in the field work. And isn't it true that the older son would be like the do-gooder, right? The one that like follow the rules, you know? It's like, I don't know, it's like birth order, but like, you know, the older sons are always the ones kind of like follow the rules. They're the do-gooders, and he picks his eyes up. All right, when he returned home and heard when he returned home, he heard the music dancing in the house. He asked one of his servants, "What was going on?" "Your brother's back," he was told, "and your father has killed the fattened calf." You know, the previous verse talks about the fattened calf. How many fattened calves do you think the father had in preparation for the son returning home? Just a side thought. All right. We are celebrating because of the safe return. The older brother was angry and wouldn't go in. His father came out and begged him. Begged. And he replied, "All these years," the son said, "I've slaved for you." "Really? And never once refused to do a single thing you told me to do. And in all that time, you never gave me a young goat or a feast with my friends." Oh, Jesus picks up those sibling tensions so well. "Yet this son of yours comes back after squandering your money on prostitutes you celebrate by killing a fatted calf." How did you know? All right? And you know when someone's really mad? When you can't say their name. "This son of yours, not my brother." You know, "This son of yours," it seems to like, you know, couples, you know, it's like, you know, "Your father," you know, you know, or "Your, oh man, my boss," you know, "What's up, boss?" You know, I knew one guy who refused to call his boss his name. He always called him boss. You know, so you know when you're really mad when you can't say their name. "Well, this son of yours." And we see this too, even in another portion of Scripture when Jesus is talking about the Good Samaritan, where someone's saying, "Well, who's my neighbor?" And Jesus tells the story of the Good Samaritan, and at the end Jesus says, and he's like, well, who was the neighbor? And the guy couldn't say Samaritan. He had to say the one who showed him kindness. Because in that day, Samaritan was like the person of poor reputation. They weren't liked. And how dare Jesus use the story of the person that was thought as the least in society to do the greatest thing in society? How dare Jesus? And so when he says, "This son of yours," that reeks of resentment. Reeks of resentment. And recent studies have shown the single greatest reason why relationships fail, why relationships are broken, why families struggle, is not unforgiveness, it's not lack of trust. One word: resentment. Resentment. And it's interesting because one of the most famous quotes I've ever heard, you might have heard this, "Unforgiveness is like drinking a poison and waiting for the other person to die." You've heard that, right? But you know the actual quote is resentment. It's not unforgiveness. It's like the Mandela effect. You guys know what the Mandela effect is? Where when you think back on something and you think it's like one way, but it's really a different way. Like my cousin loved Jiffy peanut butter, and you would like eat it by the spoonful in our college dorm. Shout out to people who eat peanut butter by the spoonful. But it's not Jiffy peanut butter, it's Jif. Alright? And so the Mandela effect is when you think it's one thing, but it's not. It's not unforgiveness, it's like drinking poison waiting for the person to die. It's resentment. Resentment. And I would just kind of further this point a little bit. I've got a cup here. And so I think this cup weighs what? 8 ounces, 10 ounces of water here. That's the weight of the cup. But the weight of the cup is really insignificant. What really matters is how long I hold this cup. Hold this cup for a couple minutes. It's no big deal. I hold it for like an hour. Maybe my arm will start to hurt. Maybe I kind of feel that tension. I hold it all day, my arms will become numb and become paralyzed. The weight of the cup didn't change. The fact that how long I was holding it changed the weight of the cup. It's the same thing when it comes to the stresses and resentment that we have, either for ourselves or for others. You know, you hold on to that resentment for a little bit, it's no big deal. Hold on to it a little while, it really starts to hurt. Hold on to it all the time, become paralyzed. Hard to even move. stuck. And really all you have to do is just put the cup down. Listen, I don't know your story. I don't know what's happened to you, or what's been done to you, or things that you've been wanting God to do that He hasn't done, and you get frustrated by it. And talking about family can be really triggering on many, many levels. But if there's resentment that you're holding on to, let it go. Don't be on the outside like the older brother. Join the party. There's so much more waiting for you. Resentment is like drinking a poison and waiting for the other person to die. And I love how Jesus ends this parable. His father said to him, "Look, dear son." He knows. He calls him son. "You've always stayed with me, and everything I have is yours." We had to celebrate this happy day, for your brother was dead and he's come back to life. He was lost, but now he is found. What get lost in this story is this. The younger son lost everything. Yeah, he came back home and he found forgiveness and dad threw a party. But the older son, because of that resentment, didn't even realize that he still had everything that the father wanted to give him. But because of that resentment, he couldn't even see it. Resentment will make you blind to the things that you already have. Let it go. Let that resentment go, and you'll be amazed how those things that you just been missing, maybe you can really see them and appreciate them more than you have before. I don't know what that is for you, but everything I have is yours. You already have what you need. Resentment just makes you blind to what you already have. I'm going to close this message with this quote from the book Wonder that we've been reading about. And if you get a chance to read this book, I guarantee it'll have a huge impact on you. It's about a boy in 5th grade with facial deformities who overcomes the perceptions and the dislikes of his class and become just a really amazing student. And he does it through kindness. And it's a really good movie too, with Owen Wilson. I think any movie with Owen Wilson's really good, you know? And it's just really one of those like feel-good stories. And I love this quote from the book. And if you had to sum up the book, it's summed up in this quote. And if you do this, if you act just a little kinder than is necessary, someone else, somewhere, someday, may recognize in you, in every single one of you, the face of God. I love that quote. Rest of you can come. My hope, my prayer for you, is that, and for myself, is that we can be a little more kinder than necessary. Because when we're kind, it's like, oh, I've done enough. Yeah, I was kind. But when you're kinder than necessary, there's that extra step. There's that extra bit. That sometimes that extra bit, that extra mile can make all the difference in the world. The father in this parable was kinder than necessary. That's the God we serve. We serve a God who's kinder than necessary. And when we embody that love, when we embody those characteristics, and when we're kinder than necessary, people not only see us, but they see God. And that's my hope for me. That's my hope for this church. Is that people can see that this church makes a difference in this community. Matt Flabat was there for the Villanova game at the Special Olympics yesterday. That's awesome. So cool to see those pictures. And that's
voice that we hear. That really stood out to me. That he runs after us so we don't get distracted by all the noise of the world. If you're a first-time visitor, either in person or watching online, we are so glad that you are joining us. Horizon donates $25 in your honor to Compassion International, and you can find out more about them on their website at compassion.com. And just let us know if you're watching online for the first time. If you'd like to support the work that Horizon is doing in our town and community, you can do so online at relationshipsnotreligion.com. There's PayPal and Venmo in the bucket outside the door. Our community dinners are resuming this week at Alex and I's house Tuesday night at 6. We're going to do chili. So if you want to bring chili, if you want to bring sides for chili, we'll just have like the traditional chili big pot for us. And then it's always a good time to hang out. We've also been training our dog not to bark as much, so that's also a win. So it's just going to be fun hanging out and eating chili. Our core value for the week is equipping people. We believe the church exists to teach people to live and love like Jesus. We think living and loving like Jesus will absolutely change the world. May you find your Heavenly Father to be ever present and ever loving this week. You are dismissed. Amen.